During a Detroit book fair in 1978, Laura Ingalls Wilder, author of Little House on the Prairie, made a claim that shocked her fans. She talked about how she shared a connection to America's very first serial killer family, the Bloody Benders. You see, the Bender murders took place in Cherryville, Kansas, 10 miles away from Independence, Kansas, where the little house stands. Wilder said that she and her pa, Charles, knew the Benders. And, according to Wilder, her pa might have had something to do with the frontier justice that ended the Benders' killing spree. Might have. Laura Ingalls Wilder said, quote, "The night of the day the bodies were found, a neighbor rode up to our house and talked earnestly with Pa. Pa took his rifle down from its place over the door and said to Ma, 'The vigilantes are called out.' Then he saddled a horse and rode away with the neighbor. It was late the next day when he came back, and he never told us where he'd been. For several years, there was more or less a hunt for the Benders, and reports that they had been seen here or there. At such times, Pa always said in a strange tone of finality, 'They will never be found.' They were never found, and later I formed my own conclusions why. Not all of Wilder's claim can be verified or disproven. It is true that the bodies of at least 10 people were found buried around the Benders' property, and that the property was within easy riding distance of the little house. It's also a long-standing theory that vigilantes caught up with the four Benders after they ambushed and murdered 10 to 20 travelers with hammers. But there are a few small discrepancies that have been pointed out about the Benders' disappearance and Pa Charles's late-night ride. Regardless of who actually stopped the Benders, we know that Pa took part in the manhunt, which, given the opportunity, would have seen the Benders shot or hung. Which is interesting to consider. The father, who was portrayed on television as being the paragon of the family, and who was always ready to end the episode with a kindly dose of American values. His real-life counterpart was ready and willing to dispense a different kind of value, vigilante justice. What an interesting episode of Little House that would have been. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Laments, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of know-how on the internet and get to the facts.
Having a strong sense of moral values might seem like a handicap these days. Last year, politicians were allegedly getting axed by the president for telling the truth, like Michael Atkinson or former head of U.S. cybersecurity, Chris Krebs. And this year, several hedge funds that lost their butts during the Reddit GameStop fiasco are getting bailouts. Not by the government, not yet at least, but billionaire investment groups like Point72 and Citadel are stepping in to offer financial life raft to Melvin Capital, a hedge fund that had been betting on GameStop's inevitable death. Today on The Re-Engineered You, we want to ask a few questions about moral values. And while we're at it, we might as well bust a few myths. Myths like Myth 1. Where does morality come from? In the brain. And what if we could just turn morality off like a switch? Myth 2. Do moral values make us better people? Do they make us more prosperous? Or are values just made up guidelines society forced on us at a young age? Myth 3. If we can't turn them off, how do we use values to our advantage? How do we use the compass to make us better achievers, tangibly? But first, I want to tell Joe about the disappearance of George Launchner and how his murder would eventually lead to the Bender getting caught.
So when you were young, Todd, did you ever watch Little House on the Prairie?
Oh, it was a favorite.
It was a favorite?
Yeah, it's very calming. Calm you down when you're an ADHD kid like me. It's probably before your time, right?
It was before my time, but I did see a couple of episodes when I was younger. And it was one of those, like, I think calming is a very good way to put it.
Or as my mom would say. So when I wasn't watching Little House on the Prairie, I was watching Mr. Rogers. And as my school teacher mom would say, very dull.
With both of them.
Have you read any of Wilder's books?
No, that's the part I never got to. While researching this episode, I felt like I was obligated to go back and read it, but I didn't get to it.
Well, we usually read books before we do episodes, but this one, because the research is so interesting, I am going to read some of her books. Because the books are always better than the movie, right?
Well, especially now that you know that in the background there was a serial killer family living next to them. I mean, like, now that you read Little House on the Prairie, you can just sort of like think, 10 miles away, serial killer family.
And this isn't a serial killer family living in Miami next to you, a big city. This is a tiny village
right.
in the late 1800s. So you knew these people.
Right. There's 20 farms, and one of those 20 is the Benders.
Now, this time frame was like 1861 to 1865. That's when the Civil War was. So the Civil War ended. The Civil War only lasted 4 years. You know that? 4 bloody years.
Right. Super short.
So the Midwest at the time, the frontier, was a brutal, beautiful place. It was wide open, but it was very wild. Murder. These were hardened men from the battlefields of the Civil War. And they were used to violence. So they were out there in these cow towns almost lawlessly. They were pretty much policing themselves. Now, Joe, both of us study and love American history. When you think of the frontier and people claiming land, is that what you think about, them being robbed and murdered by horse thieves or by tribes of Indians? Is that how you envision it?
Thanks to Western movies, yes, but only when somebody challenges you to a duel at dawn.
Okay, now this property, it was located directly on the Osage Mission Trail. And that's a trail that went from Fort Scott to the City of Independence. So this was a major travel route where they lived. And there was only a few routes that you could travel. It was narrow, and there was few of them.
Okay. Wow, I was expecting it to be like literally a backwood shortcut. So that's right on the trail.
I just thought this would be like a camping trip. Like, you go claim your land, because at this time in these territories, you were giving free land, 100 acres, 200 acres. But can you imagine bringing your wife and your 3 kids, and then you got your uncle with you, your drunk uncle, and you get attacked and killed and scalped by some Indians?
Right. A camping trip that basically lasts forever.
Okay, so the Bender family moved out there, and they built a very small one-room cabin. The roof of the cabin was made from the wagon that they rode in for. Now, this was the Bender family of 4. They dug a well, and so it was a very simple, very plain living. The rooms, there was no rooms like we think of now with dry walls or framing. The walls that separated the rooms from the kitchen to the living, where the sleeping quarters was a sheet, Joe.
Okay, so like crappy college roommate setup.
I think that's rounding up. Okay, there was a sheet. They made it from. That's like, if you made your apartment from your car.
Right.
It's like, we live in Portland, and some of the homeless shelters here are getting very, I guess you'd say, creative, right?
Right. A bead curtain would be an upgrade.
So not only was this their living quarters, they claimed 160 acres that they got for free. That's why they came out. They turned it into a convenience store. So local travelers on this route, this very busy freeway in those days, right? All the wagons coming through. And they sold things like groceries, liquor, tobacco, and they sold meals. And they turned into their very own Airbnb.
Wow, okay.
They turned into a little hotel. Now, the head of the Bender family was John. And he was a tall man for the day. He was over 6 feet tall. He had really dark black eyes and kind of creeped everybody out in town. All the villagers were kind of a little, he didn't say much, very sullen. The whole family talked very gutturally. You know what gutturally means?
A lot of G's and O's and hard K consonants.
Now, the mother was a whole different story. Ma Bender, Alvera. She was a heavy-set and mean, nasty cuss of a woman. She's supposed to have 12 kids. 3 of her husbands were suspected to be killed.
Wow.
Yeah. You talk about a black widow.
So these are the people you want running your convenience store.
She was nasty. Everyone in town called her the she-devil.
Okay.
Now, they had a young, handsome son. He was about 25 years old. And Kate, she was a 23-year-old, gorgeous. And she was kind of like a, I guess you'd say like kind of a gypsy spiritual person.
Okay.
She claimed to be able to talk to the dead. She used to talk about free love. A lot of kind of hippie stuff now, but back in those days, it was kind of seen as more maybe incest.
Okay. Someday we will do an episode that covers the spiritualism movement. Like back in this era, it was actually very common to like pretend you could summon spirits and talk to the dead. And
that was her specialty. And she would entertain groups with her talking to the dead. So you could talk to relatives that she could tell you what they were up to in heaven or hell or whatever.
Okay.
Sounds a little crazy now.
I'll buy a ticket. Let's hear that.
You probably believe in that shit. But that was kind of their con. Now, these people were the very first serial killer family. And so what would happen is they would bring in guests. And a lot of guests would come in and they would have, some of the travelers were wealthy. They'd have horses. They'd have money. So they'd distract them. And what happened was Kate, the 23-year-old, was beautiful and a little bit flirty. And she was a great storyteller. So behind the sheet, the family would be standing, holding the hammers. The son, the mom, the dad. And so the men would be mesmerized listening to this beautiful woman tell them a story about how she talks to the dead, about all her spiritual thing. And then the sheet would get ripped away. And they would bash their heads in with the hammers.
Wow. That is wild.
Not a clever. This is just a smash and grab crime. It's not some clever stuff.
I was going to say that's movies have led me to believe that like Dexter and Hannibal Lecter and like these serial killers are masterminds. Dropping a sheet and hitting them with hammers all at the same time. That's not really a mastermind play.
Yeah, guys staring at a pretty girl isn't either, right?
Right, yeah. That's a little bit predictable.
Especially when they've been on the wild for a while riding on horses.
I know. I'm bashing them. I'm like, yeah, who would ever fall for that? And then if I was riding through Kansas on a horse, just grasslands forever, and then that, maybe I'd be distracted.
Now, we really don't know how many people the Benders killed, but we know how it started to unravel for them. It's estimated at least 20 from the research. And how they started to get caught was there was a Dr. York that came out to check on them because he had sold a wagon to this guy named George Launcher. And so he knew that George Launcher and his 8-year-old daughter were traveling, and they were never heard from again. He had sold them a wagon. So he went out to check on them. So having Dr. York show up is like having Sherlock Holmes show up to a murder scene.
Okay. Well, do we want to talk about how unlikely it is to have 4 people with those kind of morals all together in one family?
Yeah. Sociopathic morals.
Yeah, what we want to look at what morals look like in the brain and how rare is it to have basically serial killer morals. Our episode today is all about values, and especially values as far as morals are concerned. So let's get into the science of morals. Todd, before we start, do you think morals are something you are born with? Like, do you think kids start out with right and wrong?
I think it's part of how you were raised. Another part is, who your parents are.
Okay.
What do you think?
Before this study, I figured that it was just all taught, that we might have an innate sense for when not to, say, hurt somebody. Like, we have empathy, but not morals, is what I assumed.
I have much different morals than my parents, though, and I know you do as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So we're gonna sort of separate the line here, hopefully, where innate morals that we're born with, morals that basically come from evolution, versus morals that our parents hand to us, morals that our parents tell us, don't do this, don't anger the neighbor, if a serial killer family shows up, grab your gun and go for vigilante justice. Like, those are all morals that would be taught to you. I'm going to start with the trolley test. Have you ever heard of the trolley test?
Never.
So this was covered in an episode of Radiolab, and they had a great episode on morality. That's where I first heard about this test. There's also a Wikipedia article we're going to link off to, because the trolley test is now infamous in psychology. We'll start by giving Todd the test. So, Todd, I want you to imagine this. There is a runway, a railway track. And a trolley is barreling down those tracks, like it is out of control. The trolley driver was me, and he hadn't slept enough, and he fell asleep, and now it's just careening out of control.
My eyes are closed. I'm in a meditation state right now, so I'm just soaking this all in.
Okay. Ahead on the tracks, there are 5 people, and they're tied up and unable to move. Like, they're tied down to the tracks like an old sort of movie. The trolley is headed straight toward them, and you're standing up on like an overpass or something, so you can see all this. And next to you is a lever. If you pull the lever, the trolley will switch to a different set of tracks. But on the other track, there is one person on this side track. So, like, 5 people on the main track, 1 person on the side track. If you do nothing at all, the trolley will kill 5 people on the main track. It'll just blow through them. They're all tied down. If you pull the lever, it'll divert to the other side track, and it will kill 1 person. So which one would you do? Would you let it go, or would you pull the lever?
Pull the lever, kill 1 person. 1 person's death is better than 5.
Okay, you were very quick to answer that. So it's a good answer. Logically, it makes sense. We're going to change the question just a little bit and see how you answer. This time, it's the exact same question. There's 5 people tied up to the track. This time, there's no side track. Instead, you are up on a bridge with somebody who is sitting on the rail, and they're just goofing off, flailing their arms, like they're being a joker, like they're not paying attention. This time, you could push the person off the rail. They hit the trolley, and whoever is sleeping at the wheel of the trolley, they realize they've hit somebody and they hit the brakes. So you would still sacrifice 1 person, but it would not kill the other 5 because the trolley would stop in time.
But I've had blood on my hands.
You've literally pushed someone to do that.
How much of a jackass is this person? Are they annoying as you?
Okay, well let's yeah, sure. They're annoying. Like they were talking about how much fun it is to kick puppies.
Yes,
Okay.
I would still push the person, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
1's better than 5.
We don't,
and it'd feel like killing 5 because I didn't do something.
Right.
I had that option.
I guess in this scenario you could almost drop anything in front of the trolley, but just for this hypothetical, it's push somebody instead of pull a lever. So we don't have a camera on in here because we don't do YouTube recordings of our show. But the faces Todd made while he was thinking about pushing somebody perfectly illustrates inborn values or inborn morals. So what just happened there? Todd made this grimace as he was considering pushing somebody off of a bridge to stop a trolley. And that wasn't there when Todd was talking about pulling a lever. This question is designed to elicit exactly that response. It is designed to make your brain go to war with itself to come to a moral decision. Effectively, when you ask this question and you put somebody under a functional MRI, parts of the brain light up that are the quote-unquote moral parts of the brain. The medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate, and the angular gyrus. That's the section on the left and right. I don't know what any of those words mean, so you don't either. You don't need to. But these all play a role in processing emotions, and they influence moral decision-making. I'm going to read this quote from CNN. CNN had an article called Brain and Moral Judgments. They said, quote, "Other studies have since confirmed that these areas are important in processing information about moral decisions, as well as an area called the ventral prefrontal cortex." The short and skinny of this, the summation that I took away from it, these are all parts that overlap into something we've talked about on this show, the default mode network. There is an idle setting in everyone's brain called the default mode network. When you are on a treadmill and your brain idles to, I'm going to have salmon for lunch, or you start thinking about the girl you're going to call back, or you start thinking about what Netflix doc you're going to binge later that evening, that's the default mode network. That's the part of your brain that is doing the least amount of effort, but is generally assigning tasks to do later. Like it's the baseline of being awake, but at rest. This network is also active during internally focused tasks like autobiographical memory retrieval, envisioning the future, conceiving perspectives, things like that. That part of your brain gets sort of like flooded with information or overlaps slightly when you're making a moral decision. When you were thinking about pushing somebody off the railing, did you feel conflicted? Like you had to do math, right?
I did. I have to justify that. I had to think about. That's why I asked you the question about.
You were like, how much does this person?
Some ammunition to reason why to justify why I pushed him off, and then I envisioned the people on the tracks as being good, God-fearing Presbyterian elders, right. You know, and their family. You know,
they're not all puppy kickers down there. We. What morality effectively is, what functional MRIs have found, morality isn't like, there's no moral organ in your brain. There's not like one seed of morality that just like shoots lightning bolts out whenever you feel morals. What morals actually are is a section of your brain that talks to the rest of your brain. Like it goes to sort of, it has a conflict. We found this out during another episode. We talked about procrastination. And what procrastination is it's two parts of your brain disagreeing on what to do. That's effectively what morals are. A primitive part of your brain that knows it's bad to, like, if early man is sitting on a branch with another early man, like two monkeys on a branch, it knows that it's a bad thing to reach over and push that other person off the branch because you will be socially ostracized. You will not be accepted in society anymore if you do that. So there is a little part of your brain that knows not to do that. And the moment you get to the point where you're pushing somebody off a bridge, you're pushing somebody off that branch, when you take a hand, you said it. You said, "I've got blood on my hands now." That is the math we want to point out. That's where morals and values come in. So the way we know the bloody benders did not have moral value anymore, they were willing to get their hands bloody. They weren't doing the math of, we need this guy's horse and money or we starve on the prairie. They were getting their hands bloody. They had completely abandoned moral value. So just out of curiosity, who is your favorite fictional serial killer?
Fictional?
Yeah, like Dexter, Hannibal, or you can name real ones if you want.
I'm probably more of a true crime person. And I've read a lot of books. Favorite's kind of a...
Well, I'm one that you gravitate toward.
Henry Lee Lucas is probably the one.
Who's that?
He was a huge kind of gypsy traveler guy that used to kill hitchhikers.
Okay.
And he had this guy, Otis Toole, that used to hang around with him.
Did he have like a killer moniker, like the Green River Killer, Zodiac Killer?
No, he was just a dummy, a big dummy.
It's funny you say dummy. We're going to get into the IQs of serial killers a little bit later, but we want to kind of like figure out if there is like a lack of moral value for killers. Like this is not the serial killer episode. This is the moral values episode, but we want to look at we've looked at what happens or where moral value comes from the innate part of our brain, like where it lies in our brain.
We want to show the extreme too, right?
We want to show the opposite, what happens when you don't have moral value. So pretty much the same type of study. We'll link off to this too. They have scanned sociopaths, people who were able to identify as passing or not passing, effectively failing the psychopath test. So they took magnetic resonance imaging on 22 criminal psychopaths and 22 healthy men who were not offenders. And they found out that the psychopaths showed less activation in the medial, frontal, and posterior cingulate cortices. Again, I don't know what those mean. I'm a layman. But
not a neurologist.
Not a neurologist. There's no doctor in front of my name. But in the study we're going to link to, they found that the areas of the brain with sort of like, we're going to say associated with emotion. So like the part of your brain that might feel emotion about pushing another monkey off a branch or a person off an overpass, they showed reduced connectivity to the prefrontal areas and reduced connectivity to the areas associated with cognition. So the feeling part of their brain was disconnected from the deciding part of their brain. And this is a quote I'm going to read directly from their article. It said, the results suggest that in criminal psychopaths, the brain does not adequately use emotional information to control behavioral responses. So that pretty much sums it up very nicely. And this is from the Journal of Biological Psychiatry. Again, we will have a link to that. So what I'm taking away from this is morally, we are hardwired to know not to get our hands bloody, but also some people, and this is about 1% of the population, would be considered psychopaths. 1% of people are hardwired to be capable of being dag-nasty evil, is my takeaway as the layman.
Dag-nasty?
Dag-nasty.
Is
Dag-nasty
that a word?
evil.
Is that just a Joe word?
I think it's a word, and if I'm making it up, I'll take it. So yeah, values are a code we have in our brain. It's hardwired, but there's also a huge portion of it that is handed down to us as children from our parents. So that is a segment of it too. So speaking of pure dag-nasty evil and psychopaths who couldn't help themselves, how did our Dr. York, our Sherlock in this instance, how did that precipitate the Benders getting caught?
So Dr. York's a good Samaritan here. He's following up on this Mr. Launcher and his daughter. So he's gone. He's missing, killed by the Benders. Now, this is somebody everyone cared about. Now, this is very weird and specific, and if this didn't happen, these probably would have killed another 100, 200 people. But Dr. York was a significant guy. He had a brother that lived in Independence, at the front of the trail and the end of the trail. So they checked in with each other. Of course, this is before GPS, cell phones, records of any kind. So 2 prominent men with resources, their brother's missing, they're going to figure out who did it. They assembled a team of 50 men and started doing their own investigation. There's no detectives, there's no law, right? So they had to do this themselves out of love for their brother.
Wow. So his brothers were his GPS, and they just start sweeping the trail with a small army. That's the kind of brother you want to have.
And they narrowed it down, and one of the places on their list, there were a lot of places on their list, they found out that one of the places they stopped was the Benders. So they went down there and talked to them, and the Benders tried to throw them off. They said, yeah, they had stayed here, but they threw it on the Native Americans. They said the Indians had killed him.
So the creepiest 7-Eleven owners in the Wild West are like, must have been the Indians.
I mean, how suspicious would these guys look?
I know, right? Like spiritualist, creepy 6-foot-tall Sasquatch, and yeah.
The she-devil wife.
She-devil.
Can't say a word without swearing.
Okay, so she-devil and creepy eye Sasquatch tell them, look over there, basically.
They put the daughter, the pretty one, out to be the spokesman for the group.
Oh, okay. Well, now it makes sense.
But the Benders knew right away that this time they had killed the wrong man.
Okay.
So all this rumors, all this scuttlebutt from these 2 major cities and from these prominent people, the local town there had a meeting and decide how they were going to handle this, and they're going to vote on it. So the dad and the son went there, and I can't imagine, they were probably sweating, shaking in their boots, because it was decided during this that every single farm, every single home was going to be turned upside down to find what happened to Dr. York.
Oh, the Bender father and the son were at the town meeting?
Yeah, they went to...
That's incredible. That is almost like a comedy right there.
Well, and people started to notice about this Bender family that they didn't really look like they were related. They didn't look like brother and sister, the kids. They kind of looked and acted maybe a little more like husband and wife.
Okay.
Well, the dynamics and the chemistry of this family is a little weird.
Okay, so they were
it's
giving
either
off
incest or they're lying about their relationships.
Okay, weird vibes. Would either surprise you? I mean, like, given this family?
No. And I wouldn't sell life insurance to anybody in that family either. That friggin' Ma has killed 3 husbands that we know of.
Right. Just be like, man, you guys have a lot of hammers hanging on your wall.
Just 12 kids, but only 1 spoken for right now.
Right. So I kind of laughed a bit at the idea of the Benders attending the town hall, assembled to go look for the Benders. Like that. Do you think that was brave or stupid?
I think they're trying to just throw them off and find out, kind of put their foot in the water and see.
Yeah.
Are they on their radar? We don't have to check my farm, guys. We're clean.
Well, that's what I imagine. Like when you said that, I was like, that'd be amazing to listen to. They would be like, yeah, come on, let's go search everywhere, but our farm last.
The old man barely spoke English.
Yeah.
I think he was of German descent, but they said his German and his English, because at that time there were a lot of German immigrants, so there would have been people that understand his German, but I guess his German and his English weren't.
Yeah. You said they all spoke very gutturally, and a lot of that does come from like Germanic languages. So the reason I asked about if you thought they were smart, like if this was sort of like a genius play, or they're just too dumb to not come to town hall, I went looking just briefly. I was like, how smart are serial killers? Like if they're our measure for people that don't have moral value, they've got to be ultra geniuses, right?
Yeah, the Dexter, the Hannibal Lecter, the Ted Bundy.
Right, yeah. If they are so able to like avoid getting caught, they've got to be brilliant. So there's something called the Serial Killer Information Center. It's a database created between a couple of universities and they update it pretty much regularly with serial killer data. As of 2016, all of their information pointed to serial killers landing on the low side of average for IQ. So we all sort of give serial killers credit for being audacious geniuses. Their IQs land like closer to 90. So on average.
Yeah, you think of them outthinking their prey and law enforcement.
It is, from what I can tell, it's more like the Mr. Magoo effect, where like these serial killers are just so audacious that they don't think they're going to get caught, and so they kind of don't. They commit the crimes, and they do it in ways where they just avoid the police because they're doing stuff that nobody thinks somebody would do. Nobody's thinking to look for it.
What do you think an average IQ is for
one? Well, it's 90 to 100 is average. So they land around 90. So we want to look at now, our first section was how many morals are imprinted in us, like part of our brain. How much of our moral is behavior? How much of it is like us learning from our environment around us? We know that parents will try to guide our morals. They will tell us what's right and wrong. Whether we listen to that or not, there's tons of psychology studies about it, but really we don't have to cover that quite so much because it's up to the individual to listen to their parents and how much of that they absorbed. Go read Dr. Spock if you want to know about that. What we're looking at today is how much of our morals, our values, come from pro-social behavior. Have you, Todd, ever heard of the watchful eye effect?
No, what's that?
Okay. I'm actually gonna turn this into a question. When you see like a donation bucket at the counter when you're like buying a coffee, are you more willing to put money in it when somebody is turned around, like the barista's looking at you, or when they have their back turned?
Oh no, I always make sure that they know that I'm putting it in there.
Okay.
I'm not proud of that, but
yeah. Well, you want the credit.
Exactly.
Who doesn't?
The attention.
Right. What about littering? Would you be more likely to pick up litter if somebody's watching?
I think that's even.
Okay. And what about throwing trash on the ground?
Never when someone's watching.
Okay. I'm glad you said that because it makes me feel a little bit less like a monster. So does this study in general. For the record, Todd and I aren't going around littering. We just, in our own experiences.
But we do donate a lot of money.
That's true. To baristas. So the watchful eye effect. There have been a bunch of studies. Like this is more like a collection of studies than an individual one. So we're going to have a link just to the wiki because it's a very popular area of study in psychology. Pro-social behavior. So behavior that is like shows social values or advertises social values. We are much more likely as humans to do them if there is a set of eyes on us. There's a study where shows that we're more likely to pick up trash at a bus stop and pick up after ourselves in a cafeteria. If we have eyes on us, we're less likely to commit bicycle theft, and people are more likely to give the full amount of money if they are like buying coffee that is like on the honor system. So like if you're in a lunchroom and there is coffee, but you have to like put a quarter in a box or a jar. People will pay the full amount if there is eyes on them. Now the funny part, the fun part of these tests, they don't have to be real. So like human eyes, like a head is looking at you, like you, Todd, are looking at me, that would make me pay the full amount. They found that a fake set of eyes will also make somebody pay a higher amount or pick up their litter.
Really?
If you paint eyes on the side of a building, people are less likely to be dishonest.
I totally see that because you see those signs on people's houses that the camera's watching you or whatever.
Right. This neighborhood
Even if
is
you're not
protected
doing
by
anything, you kind of just start
neighborhood watch. Yeah, cameras do that in stores. Now that I've read this study, I've noticed a lot more like art involves human eyes in stores and things like that.
But we know with those cameras, no one's watching them. There's no one watching those all day.
Right.
You just feel that accountability, right?
Right, exactly. So this is another thing where we're like, we might be a little bit hardwired, and it might also be by choice. Like the choice part of it is, I don't want to litter if a bunch of people are watching, but the behavior part of it is also if it's a painting of eyes, I'm slightly less likely to litter. There's also something that we're not going to get into hugely called the broken windows effect, where if a place is trashed, like if we go into a bad neighborhood and there's litter everywhere, we're more likely to litter anyway, just because it is clearly socially acceptable. It's similar to like if you go into a dive bar and there's peanut shells on the floor everywhere, and you're like, oh, the establishment wants me to do this. People have the same sort of logic with peanut shells as they do with like trash on the ground. If you walk into a neighborhood and trash is everywhere, you're like, oh, the establishment is okay with this. How much health benefit do you think comes from being honest?
I don't think any. I think maybe morally, maybe a little bit of self-esteem.
Yeah, I would think so. That it's more of a
like
personal
physical
boost,
health?
Maybe.
Mental health, maybe a little bit, but physical health?
Yeah. I was going to assume that lying was actually better for you. I really was before getting into the study. This is the part of our show where we determine whether or not having moral values is healthy or not. Before reading this, I assumed that lying to preserve, to stave off shame, and lying to save face was actually healthier. I assumed that sort of like keeping up mental barriers was a good thing.
You insulate yourself and you avoid, uncomfortable things.
Right, exactly. I got this article from Newswise. It's a pretty well-known study about lying, and it's author Anita E. Kelly, a professor of psychology from the University of Notre Dame. They found that Americans lie about 11 times a week. And she and her team wanted to figure out if lying less was better for someone's health. So approximately half her participants were instructed to stop telling major lies and minor lies for 10 weeks. And they brought them into the lab, and they actually gave them polygraph tests to assess the number of lies they told. So like polygraphs aren't really used in court anymore, but they're still used in like psychology to see if like not to lie test them, but to see if they're under stress basically. But the major takeaway for this study, over the course of 10 weeks, the link between less lying and improved health was significantly stronger, especially in the group that didn't lie at all. That was a pretty key part of this study. Like from what I could find, the moral value of not lying, most of it seemed to be that the people who participated in the study said that their mental health was better and their relationships were better, not worse. Apparently lying less, they didn't say this in the study, but like reading through this, I kind of inferred it just because of the benefits they got. Less lying means you have to be not just more honest, but you have to do more mental work. Like it forces you to, instead of, okay, so if I tell you, Todd, I can't do the podcast this week because I have a cold. That might be a polite lie, right?
Right.
That might just be like, oh, I've got a really busy week. I've got a lot backed up. Work has been slamming me. But instead of saying 30 minutes worth of explanation, if I just say I have a cold, that's a polite lie. I assume the reason why so many groups that didn't lie reported better relationships is because it actually made them do more work, like actually have to stop and explain things or build relationships or build boundaries instead of easy lies.
When you care more for people, you tell them the truth, even though it's uncomfortable. We talk a lot about our shows about building trustworthiness in our friends and our other relationships, how important it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we have whole episodes about how appearing trustworthy or being trustworthy are worth more than being a good negotiator sometimes in business. So yeah, that I went into the study thinking lying must keep you sort of insulated or be a shortcut to getting through with the rest of your day. Turns out if you completely cut out lying altogether, you have better relationships, and thus you have significantly better health.
And isn't it too that we kind of know what's going on, even if someone's not transparent with us? We know the truth.
Yeah, we sense it, right?
Yeah.
Like if I tell you I can't do the podcast because I have a cold, you kind of sense when I've been getting sick lately. You can probably kind of sense when I'm just busy. So there, even if it's subconscious, I think it's there. So speaking of false fronts and lies, the family that was literally using a false sheet front for their store to hammer people, who were they? I mean, like you've hinted twice already that they are like, they had some weird relationships, that they weren't like even appearing as a family. They may not have been what they seemed. What was the big lie? Like what were they hiding?
The worst reviews on Google, period, right? They were scumbags. So keep in mind the time. Keep in mind where they were. Most of the sellers that are moving out west, Joe, had nothing. That's why they're moving.
Right.
If you were established and you lived in New York, Boston, one of the major developed cities, St. Louis, you're not going to move. People are moving to get free land. People had very little resources. So of all these people, the low end, I think it was about 20 people killed. All they got of it was about $5,000 and some livestock, some horses. So these were thrill kills.
Oh, wow. So aside from the doctor, these were all just like poor settlers.
Mm-hmm. And people with money would be staying at, well, guess what? Nicer places, right?
Okay. So it really was like the Airbnb.
Another sign that these were thrill kills. Every single body that they've ended up finding, I don't want to spoil it, on the property, wasn't just killed, wasn't just hit with a hammer, was also mutilated. So there was extra things done to all the bodies and the corpses.
Holy hell. Okay.
Now, the saddest one, this one kind of, well, obviously it upset me. The George Launcher and his daughter. His daughter was only 8 years old. Launcher, the adult male, his skull was just crushed and then he was buried. But the young girl, only 8 years old, her arm was broken and there was a scarf around her neck. And what they reason happened from what to her end was that she was actually buried alive.
Oh, wow.
This part, on an upper note, I guess you would say, there was a man in the town. His name was Rudolph Brockman, and he had been courting. He had the hots for Kate Bender, the one who was, the bait for all these
spiritualist.
Murders. So they went and found his ass. They dragged him to a tree and they hung him, not to die, just until he passed out. And then they let him wake back up from being unconscious. And then they kick him a couple times in the head and ask him a bunch of questions. Say, hey, you know where they are. You tipped them off because they're gone. The Benders took off after that town hall thing. So
Mm-hmm.
What they think was that he went and told them and tipped them, so they're coming after you guys. They know it's you. They're coming after you. So they did this about 3 times, Joe. They hung him up until he passed out.
Oh, wow.
Kicked him in the head. And they said afterwards he was like kind of wobbling home, He didn't talk, but that was a rough day, right?
He didn't talk?
Didn't tell him anything. Either he didn't know anything, or I think at that point you start making shit up, right?
Right.
But if he told him that he told him that he's dead. These guys are playing for keeps. This is not.
Yeah, pick a direction. Just be like, they went that away, and just point.
But then you're dead because
Right.
So
that's true.
Yeah. So.
And just to remind everybody, if Pa from Little House on the Prairie wasn't doing this, like if he wasn't in that mob hanging Rudolph Brockman, he at least knew about it. Like Pa, the man of folksy wisdom and values in the show, just remember he was part of this.
Now remember these huge mobs of people. They went starting to threaten other families too. Anybody who had any kind of association with them. And I think a lot of it, Joe, was just being out of fear.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, you've known these people, you have sons and daughters and wives and husbands. You don't want to be next. So if there's anybody else who's helped with this or included in it, you're going to, point the finger at them and try to get rid of them, kill them.
Right. In a territory where you couldn't call the cops, I can totally see doing that. So do you want to talk about how to utilize values to our benefit? Because we've went this whole show talking about, Pa, Ingalls, Wilder, and how at the end of every episode he would talk about the values that they had learned and the morals that they had. We want to take the values that are baked into us and the ones that we've learned, and we want to use it as a tool, because this is ultimately a podcast about how to become better, like how to re-engineer ourselves. The best tool I could find, and we're going to cover 2 studies that both of them back this up, and they were really good studies. One is from a PBS article from 2009, and it's by the University of Colorado, and the other one is from Stanford, and they both back up the exact same exercise, which is 15-minute writing exercise. So, Todd, have you ever sat down and just written about your personal values?
I never have, no.
Okay.
I've journaled about stuff that's happened, but never how I feel about things, but not what my core values are. You?
No. I think the closest I've gotten is I did an exercise once where somebody said, write down on a list everything that you want to do in life, like all the things you want to accomplish. On a separate list, write down all the things that you did today, and the two won't match up.
You want to know what your future looks like? Look at what you're doing right now.
Exactly. And my list was like Call of Duty, beer, and pizza. And I was like, okay, this isn't working. So the exercise they asked students to do, they started this study with 407th grade students from a public school in Connecticut. And this goes on and on, by the way. These 2 studies will cover different groups and different large groups in different school settings. So I'm going to stop explaining how many students were involved, because this gets huge. But please look at our research and look at the articles we have linked, because this actually is very positive and conclusive.
But the Re-Engineer You, we hate studies of 20 or 30 college kids. So this isn't one of those. This is a lot of people.
It is, totally. They were given a 15-minute writing assignment, and they were asked, the non-control group was asked to list values, such as values about relationships with your family, athletic abilities, smarts, whatever values are most important to the students. That's what they were asked to list out. And that included moral values and religious values and things like that. The control group was asked to write about values and ranked as unimportant, and the values that might matter to somebody else. So they were asked to write about values, but not ones that they held dear themselves. This exercise, I'm going to repeat this a few times because it kind of blew me away. The exercise reduced the achievement gap between black and white students by 40% over one term.
Wow.
So we've talked about the achievement gap in this podcast. It's kind of a well-known phenomenon. It is able, listing out one's values and why they're important to you can lower the black and white achievement gap, and it was as short as one term.
Sounds more effective than goal setting even.
It is more effective than goal setting in this specific instance, in narrowing the achievement gap. Goal setting is more effective for achieving, it's statistically far more effective for achieving if you are just sort of like putting things out in front of you to get to in the next couple of years. But at closing the achievement gap, listing values was more helpful. In fact, if you are going to set goals for yourself, like write them down, include things about your values. Right next to your goal, what value that represents, why you want that goal. In these groups, they're also less likely to need remedial work or repeat a grade. It was 5% of them had to repeat the grade as compared to 18% in the control group. That's a huge difference. I mean that's 3 times higher in the control group. This is from the article. They say such a small intervention could have such big effects, quote, surprises most people to the point where some people I know didn't believe the initial findings. And this is from psychologist Richard Nesbitt. He says, what makes it believable to me is that as a social psychologist, I've learned that dinky things sometimes have big effects.
I totally get that. I also see that it kind of puts you back in line. If you could tell that you're doing certain behaviors that are not in line with your core values or who you know you are, you're going to kind of stop doing those a little bit.
That is so incredibly well put. We have covered values briefly on other episodes. We had one episode where we talked about how internal values made you better at achieving than external values. Basically, how beautiful you are, how good your grades are. Those don't stack up quite as well as like internal, like here's what I am as a person, here's my core belief. But you're completely dead on. I'm going to quote this one from the Stanford article. Quote, it turns out that writing about your values is one of the most effective psychological interventions ever studied. In the short term, writing about personal values makes people feel more powerful, in control, proud, and strong. It also makes them feel more loving, connected, and empathetic toward others. It increases pain tolerance, enhances self-control, and reduces unhelpful ruminations after a stressful experience. And it goes on to say, I'm going to quote this too. This is from the Stanford study again. In the long term, writing about values has been shown to boost GPAs, reduce doctor visits, improve mental health, and help with everything from weight loss to quitting smoking and reducing drinking. It helps people persevere in the face of discrimination and reduces self-handicapping. Now, you don't have to write about your values in like a book. Like you don't have to go on and on and on. This is just an exercise. Both of these cover the 15-minute value exploration exercise. So almost every sort of like episode we've had in this podcast so far, we like to end with a little tidbit of something you can do that will improve large sections of your life. We call them cornerstone habits. Science calls them cornerstone habits.
And I think we all have 15 minutes, right?
15 minutes for this big of a benefit. Yeah, I think we all have that. So I kind of want to get back to, if we're just focusing on values and reflecting on internal values, we have to get back to Ingalls Wilder, Charles. Do you think he was in the group that caught up with the Benders? Laura thinks he was.
Well, this is a huge mystery here. So there's a lot of research that was done, and Laura Walters was what, Joe? She was a fiction writer.
Right.
So why would she frame this like this if it wasn't true? And history has shown the Ingalls left Kansas in the spring of 1871, and the Benders' crimes didn't start till 1873, 2 years later. So they were long gone. So most of this is made up.
Okay. Well, to sort of answer your question, why she might make a comment that may not be true, she was literally on a PR tour during this, right?
She's trying to sell some books.
Right.
Trying to get a TV deal.
That's what I would assume.
But this was before TV, wasn't it?
I don't know if this tour happened before or after the show, but it could have been.
There's no TV around invented yet, I don't think.
Oh, in 1870? No, of course not.
This is what I think. And I read an article about this in our doc. What this means to her was that her father was capable of doing this. And there's been some other rumors about this time and rumors about her life that there was a lot of violence towards Native Americans. So it's very likely that there was brutal things that done by her father, the other men, her pa, to Native Americans in the area that were brutal. And maybe it's a way of kind of like a confession.
Oh, wow. Okay. So Pa might not have grabbed the rifle and gone after the Benders. It may be more accurate that he was just grabbing his rifle and leaving the house every other evening.
Yes, and doing some unspeakable things too.
Okay. Wow.
But this is what really resonated with me. I mean, we grew up watching TV, right? We love TV. We love sitcoms. We love all that kind of stuff. After school specials, you remember those?
Oh, yeah.
Well, how are all these fiction fathers painted?
Paragons of moral value and uprightness.
Right. They're these wise
Cosby.
leaders the Bill Cosbys, right? And then what happens? I mean, I think in a violent time, they were seeing what they were doing, this vigilante justice, as what? Protecting their family.
Right. It's the frontier father, standing at the door, keeping the wilderness at bay.
Yeah, one father wouldn't want to protect his family. We can't all be the picture of moral value like Pa Ingalls from Little House on the Prairie, but we can get a better handle on why values are important and why we might want to have a few fireside chats about morality with our own children. Morality, in a nutshell, is the brain having an argument with itself. It's an internal argument that's been going back as far as early humans, as far back as one monkey looking at the other, wondering if it could get away from shoving it off the branch. We're built with a moral circuit, sensing innately that it's bad to do harm to one another, except perhaps the 1% of the population, the psychopaths, who are born without that circuit. But don't worry too much about that 1%. Serial killers, like the bloody Benders, aren't common at all. And statistically, they're dumber than you think. At the very least, they're on the lower side of the IQ average. So not quite the mega geniuses portrayed in Hollywood, like Hannibal Lecter. Values, like honesty, can improve health. And writing about your personal values, in general, can boost grades and shrink the achievement gap when you're in school. And outside of school, writing about your values can make you feel more powerful, make you feel more love and connection towards others, enhance self-control, and reduce the brooding period after a stressful event. So you don't have to take Pa's sermonizing to heart. Decide on your own values. Write about them. Reap those sweet rewards of having your own eternal code. And we can all stop worrying so much about genius serial killers, unless we find ourselves in an Airbnb with fake canvas walls. Then we should be very afraid. You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where we have research links, show notes, and blog articles for every episode. We also appreciate feedback, and we love spirited debates.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.